Okay, welcome back. And in this lecture, we're going to kind of get into the typical behaviors of equids and particularly horses. Now, again, the history is important on how they spend their day, what their natural behavior is. And even though we've domesticated these animals, and we think over 6,000 years ago when that first happened, they still have, all of our domestic stock today still has some of these innate wild behaviors. So they share very, very, very common behaviors with the wild stock that we find. Now, the true wild horse is the Przewalski horse. The wild horses in the west of the United States or other parts of the world, those are horses that were once domesticated and then released. So they had some man influence on their breeding and maybe their behavioral genetics. So really the only true wild horse is the Przewalski horses. Now the problem is with the Przewalski horses is they almost went extinct in the wild. There was less than 20 animals in the late 60s, early 70s, and through conservation efforts they were able to carefully breed these animals and then get them up to where there's over 1,500 today. And they're being re-released in parts of Mongolia and China. So really awesome that we've actually been able to save this ancient equid. Now the problem is with it is these were all animals that were kept in captivity. So they'd been handled by man, and any of their learned wild behaviors could have been extinguished during their captivity. So they still have their innate, natural behavior, but any learned behavior that they might have had in the wild, we may never know that they did exhibit that. Now with the donkeys, we can actually go and study the wild asses and learn these learned wild behaviors that they have. The problem is, like say the Somali wild ass, there's maybe 300 left in the world. They're under extreme threat of extinction, and they're in a part of the world that's pretty contentious, that going and studying their behaviors is very, very difficult. So that's a tough one. And then obviously the zebras, we can still go and observe them and get some idea of wild equid behavior, but how much of that really applies to, say, a domestic horse, really kind of hard to say. But there are some similarities. So with that being said, my laboratory and really under direction of one of my current graduate students, Angie Adkin, we went and did a small behavioral study at White Oak here in Florida. Again, is that conservation center that is working very, very hard to save many, many endangered species. And we did behavioral studies of the Somali wild ass. They had Grevy's zebras, and if you go back to that first few lectures, the Grevy's zebras is the most endangered zebra with maybe 1,000 animals left on the planet. And then we studied our horses here at the University of Florida, and we compared time budgets. And basically what time budgets is we're looking at their normal behaviors throughout a day, and we figure out how do they spend their day, what are they doing. Now these were all animals in a large outdoor natural setting, so they're all in large pastures, not kept in paddocks, not kept in stalls, out in a large natural area. And, all right, so just looking at our preliminary data, and we feel we have to do some more observations, and this was, I believe, over 3,000 observations that we made. We still have to do much more to make any definitive conclusions, but still the data is very interesting. So here's the Somali wild ass, the Grevy zebra, and the horse. And if you look, the majority of their day is foraging, eating. And that's what they do. They just, and you study the behavior, and I'll tell you, it's not the most exciting thing sometimes, because all you do is watch them eat, and you're really wanting to see the social behaviors, and that's such a small part of their day. Most of their day is getting their forage or sleeping. All right, so if we look at that data and take the data from other sources, horses and donkeys and the other equids, they forage all day. That's what they're made to do. Ranging on savannas or the plains of the Americas, just eating grasses all day and moving along. And in this video, again, of the Somali wild asses, and these are the jennies that are pregnant, so, all the babies are inside mama right there. And when you watch their behavior, it's not that exciting, to be honest with you, because all they do is eat all day. and you don't get to see some of the cool stuff. I mean, it does come around and you get really excited, but again, when you watch their behavior, this is what they're doing most of the day. Now, that's going to depend on forage availability. So the horses in the United States that are in the desert regions of Idaho and Nevada and New Mexico, where the forage is much more sparse, much more spread out, these animals are going to be traveling much more often than, say, horses on lush pasture. So, you know, they may not forage as much because they can't. There's just not that much food. So they move quite a bit more, maybe don't rest as much as these animals. And it would be interesting to compare their behavior to, you know, pasture-kept horses. Now, this obviously has implications to health and nutrition. Next week, we're going to go much more into this, but it's important to remember these animals have evolved to eat small meals throughout the day. And what we've done with confinement and management is typically we feed them twice a day, in the morning and the evening. So what does the animal do for the rest of the day when it's not eating? It eats all of its hay and it's in a stall and then it just sits there. And so this is where we get into those abnormal behaviors, which we'll cover in the next lecture. So resting is the next big portion. And again, this is later when all those jennies had their babies, and you can see the moms and the babies. Some are laying down, some are standing up, and they're resting. So they do that quite a bit throughout the day too. And how they can do this is through that stay apparatus. So that's how they can stand and sleep at the same time. So there's actual muscles in there, which you can see in these two images, and the type of muscles and ligaments isn't important. It's just the concept that those can actually lock in place, and they lock the legs, so then the animal can sleep and stay balanced at the same time. So that's how they do that. Now, obviously, the young are going to rest much more longer than the adults. They're growing, they're using up more energy, they need that time to do that. Now, if we look at the adult horses, on average, they spend 19 hours per day alert and awake. So in comparison to humans, which on average spend about 16 hours a day awake and alert and about 8 hours at night sleeping, you know, they sleep a lot less than we do. Now, in the remaining 5 hours, 2 hours of that is in a drowsy state. So here you can see this horse, you know, relaxed, eyes kind of halfway shut, and just kind of just standing there. And they're in this not fully awake, not fully asleep state. And so about 2 hours of the day, they're doing that. And then 3 hours a day, they're sleeping. So you're like, wow, they don't need as much sleep as we do. And their sleep isn't 3 hours continuous. It's divided up into small bouts throughout the day. So they'll sleep for 3 to 4 minutes, and then they're awake doing something else, and then maybe they'll relax a little bit, get a little bit drowsy, then sleep for another few minutes. But they don't do it continuous like we do through the night. And if you looked at the amount of time a horse spends laying down throughout the day, it's about 2 hours each day that they should be laying down a little bit. So it is normal for them to lay down, and I put this in here just so you know that, and on average it's about 2 hours a day. Now there's some other notable behaviors, and again, this could be another entire Coursera course, and maybe hopefully in the future we could offer something like that, talking about different behaviors. But these social behaviors are the ones that are just so neat to see and study. And, you know, obviously the playing, the grooming, we've talked about, the fighting or aggression and submission, and all these different, different things that equids show than, any other species. So we don't have time to go into all those in this course, but, there are some wonderful books out there if you want to find some on horse behavior, and they do kind of jump more into these social behaviors. But again, some of the other behaviors, the eliminative, sexual, investigative. But overall, if you look at this, most of the day they're eating and sleeping, and those social behaviors that are really neat to see make up less than 10% of their day. So again, it's normal for them to be either sleeping or eating. So in our next lecture, we're going to kind of jump into a little bit on some of these abnormal behaviors we see, and this horse is cribbing, which we'll talk about, and maybe some strategies on how to try to lessen these abnormal behaviors. So we'll see you then.